Good evening, everyone. This evening I want to examine the expenditure profile of successive governments and for the public to determine the expenditure profile, the priorities of the APNU AFC government between 2015 and 2020. What was the expenditure profile like during that period, as against the spending from 2020 beyond, what is targeted by that spending, and the profile of that expenditure. Now, anyone running your home or running a business would know that if your recurrent expenditure or expenditure on things that does not add value, create wealth, or expand opportunity for your household or businesses, that if that expenditure takes up most of your money, then your ability to save, your ability to invest, your ability to expand your own businesses, in the case of your home, your ability to improve your home, repaint your home, extend your home, all of that will be affected because you're using up your revenue, or you're using up the revenue that you have, the money that you have available to you for things that does not create value or add value. So when we look at what constitutes wasteful spending, you would notice that there is a clear policy frame of the APNU AFC government versus the policy frame of the People's Progressive Party civic government. And if you go through the history of our country, you will see the period of growth in our economy, expansion in the private sector, the period through which we were able to create opportunities for the growing of new wealth. Look at the expansion of the diamond housing scheme, the building of new growth hub and new growth poles that expanded economic activity, improve disposable income, expand job creation. All of those things are affected by how you invest your resources as a country. Now, if you look at the expenditure profile between 2015 and 2020, you will see that almost one-third, the expenditure between 2015 and 2020, you will see that the current expenditure outstripped the capital expenditure. Now, capital expenditure is that expenditure that we use to expand schools, build new schools, health center, giving you the best health care, giving your children access to education, building roads, opening up infrastructure for the farmers, opening up new lands, the investment in creating infrastructure for housing. All of this constitute what is capital expenditure. Now, if you look at 2019, for example, the government then, the APNU AFC government, spent on local travel and subsistence expenditure. That's local travel and expenditure to sustain local travel. That is going from one place to the other. When you look at the expenditure profile, the entire budget of 2029, when you look at the revenue profile of 2029, what the APNU AFC government spent on local travel alone was more than the entire capital budget for Region 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 combined. Can you imagine this? And Mr. Jordan, who was Minister of Finance then, overlooked this expenditure. He overlooked this expenditure profile. So in 2019, the APNU AFC government spent on local travel and the meals and other things to support that local travel more money than they spent on healthcare, education, agriculture, public transport, roads, all of these things combined for Region 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Can you imagine that? Just imagine that that a government, the APNU AFC government in 2019, spent on travel and expenditure related to local travel more resources than the entire capital budget for Region 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you look similarly at what they spent on dietary, this percentage of money that is spent on dietary in 2019, dietary is the food and the entertainment and so on that the APNU AFC government spent on. When you look at what they spent on dietary, it was more than the entire capital budget for education and health combined in 2019. Can you imagine that? What they spent on dietary in 2019 was more than the capital budget for health and education. Not only did we lose because we care grant, there was no investment in education, no new schools, the maintenance of building, no new hospitals, what they spent on dietary, on food for themselves in government in 2019, the APNU FC government, was more than the entire capital budget for education and health combined. And we talk about waste. We talk about where the priorities were. We talk about why we had this collapse in the education sector, the healthcare sector, why we had a regression in terms of expansion of the economy. These are the reasons. How the resources were spent, how the resources were wasted, where the resources were concentrated. If, for example, we are to apply the APNU AFC expenditure profile in 2019 to a 2023 budget, let us say that they were here in 2023, and we were to look at the profile of their expenditure, how they were prioritizing the expenditure, then that government would have spent on, in 2023, looking at their 2019 expenditure, that government would have spent on local travel and subsistence more than the entire capital budget for Region 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So although we had the tremendous increase under the PPC government on the capital expenditure in Region 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, seeing new schools, new lands opening up, the new Hope-like canals, expansion of DNI, expansion of roads. If they were in government, taking their expenditure profile and what they were doing, they would have spent more on dietary and local travel than the entire capital budget today of Region 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, if they were in government. Because the example is there. In 2019, as I said, what they spent on dietary alone was more than the education and health budget combined in 2019, the capital expenditure of that budget. So the expenditure profile or the nature of spending by the APNU AFC government was what we term non-productive expenditure. Non-productive expenditure. Expenditure basically that constituted bloat in the government system, that constituted what we term the enjoyment of government by the APNU AFC elite. Now, the Ministry of Finance and the budget were crafted by Mr. Jordan. And if you look, for example, at some of what was promised and what was actually delivered, you'll recall too, when you look at the expenditure profile, that within a few months of assuming office in 2015, Mr. Jordan and his government secretly gifted their ministers and other officials a 50% increase in their salaries until we exposed it. A 50% increase in salary. This is the same set of people that promised an immediate 20% increase to the teachers and others. 50% increase in salaries for themselves. Under the PP civic government, the salary increases that public servants got and the rest of the economy got, that is the exact salary increases that our ministers and other officials would get. No preferential treatment. But that is how the expenditure profile was for the APNU AFC government. If you look at the teachers and public servants during that period, they had to wait for the salary increases. 2 years after the APNU AFC assumed office, remember that months after they assumed office in 2015, they gifted themselves 50% increase, the ministers and the government. 2 years after the APNU AFC assumed office, it granted salary increases way below the campaign promise of 20%. On October 24, 2018, the Ministry of Education and Guyana Teachers Union agreed to increases between 12 and 8%, and 8% and 6% for 2017, and 8% across the board for 2018. That was the increases, compared to the 50% that they granted themselves. Apart from offering the teachers less than 20%, many teachers were also shortchanged. And I want teachers to remember this, because they introduced the manner in which they paid the increases would have disallowed many teachers from benefiting because they were not on the right scale. They were not placed on the right scale, and they were placed at the bottom of the scale. So the salary increases that was computed on a less basis, on a smaller basis, so that at 20%, they did not receive the full adjustment of the increases that were granted. The increases that were granted to the public servant was also substantially below that campaign promise. And we must also remember that public servants who were on contract, and the doctors would recall, because they complained bitterly, the public servants who were on contract had to surrender their gratuity, thereby reducing their emoluments by 22.5% annually. The loss in emoluments by these public servants is reflected in the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars of earning to the public servants themselves between 2015 and 2020. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, the members of the discipline services were also deprived of the 1-month tax-free bonus. Sugar workers were fired during the Christmas season without prompt payment of their severance, and CSOs were relieved of their position. Yes, it was the PPP Civic in opposition that had to go and fight for severance for the sugar workers. There's more than 2,000 CSOs that lost their jobs, the sugar workers that were sent home during the Christmas season, and the removal of the bonus from our discipline services members. That is callous. That is callous. So, due to the APNU AFC callous management of key sectors, many citizens lost their jobs. The workforce in the bauxite industry, and they must answer for this. This is their record. This is their record. The workers in the bauxite industry, the workforce in the bauxite industry was reduced by 50%, whilst hundreds directly lost their jobs in the forestry and mining sector. Yes, it was between 2015 and 2020 that we had the greatest loss of jobs in the forestry sector, in the mining sector. Not only sugar, not only the CSOs, but the bauxite industry workforce also contracted by 50%. If you look historically, the only time in our history when workers suffered as much as they did under the APNU AFC was in 1981 and 1982, when 17% of the public sector employees were retrenched by the PNC government. 17%. of the public sector workers were retrenched by the PNC government. In 2015 and 2020, in the mining, forestry, and bauxite sector alone, directly and indirectly, it is estimated that more than 30,000 workers were affected. Directly and indirectly, in the sugar belt, more than 20,000 families were affected. The families that lost their 1-month bonus, the discipline services, the hundreds of millions that was lost in gratuity when the gratuity was removed from contract workers. So, when you look at the labeling of capital expenditure as a waste of funds by Mr. Jordan and the APNU AFC bunch, it tells you a story that they cannot relate to the importance of the capital expenditure in opening up opportunity, expanding wealth, creating an environment for the expansion of the economy. Look at what is happening all across the country. What is capital expenditure? The new Demerara River Bridge is a capital expenditure. The new highways that we're building, capital expenditure, reducing the time, your transportation time, reducing wear and tear, reducing the cost of transportation. The community roads that is increasing the value of your homes, giving you better access to your homes. The D&I investment that is opening up new lands for agriculture. The building of farm-to-market access road that is opening up new opportunities for macro-scale agricultural development. The building of the new hospitals, the new children hospital, the 12 hospitals we're doing regionally, regional hospitals and community hospitals. All of this forms part of that capital expenditure. But they weren't investing in this. They weren't investing in this. They don't see this expenditure profile does not fit their policy making matrix. And that is philosophically the difference. That is why during the dark days of the PNC, you know that in non-productive spending, what it led to? It led to borrowing and printing of money to sustain the public sector. We must not forget this. This was part of our history, where the PNC, the APNU, AFC, the PNC, non-productive way in which they expended resources led to us borrowing and printing money to sustain the public sector. You must also remember that the limited capital spending during those days and between 2015 and 2020, that is why we have the crisis in the electricity sector. No capital expenditure, no maintenance program. The expenditure profile was not for that, although they saved billions of dollars because of the cost of fuel would have reduced drastically during their period in government as a result of global prices. Where did that money go? Where did that money go? And that is why, successively, during their periods in government, the limited capital spending contributed to the collapse of the social sectors. Massive infrastructure deficit that haunted the country for many, many years. Because they did not invest in infrastructure. They did not invest in the road network. They did not invest in housing. They did not invest in water. They did not invest in the expansion of the drainage and irrigation system. These are things that are productive, that leads to the expansion of production, productivity, creation of wealth, expansion of revenue base. So, during the 5 years of the APNU-AFC between 2015 and 2020, the recurrent expenditure outstripped capital expenditure by 5 times. In 2015, recurrent expenditure was more than 5 times higher than capital expenditure. And that is where you have to use the budget numbers then. On average, Recurrent expenditure was almost 4 times higher than capital expenditure between 2019 and 2020. Can you imagine that? The recurrent expenditure was 4 times higher on average between 2019 and 2020 than capital expenditure. How can that expenditure profile contribute to improvement in productivity, contribute to improvement in competitiveness, contribute to improvement in healthcare, in housing, in education? That is why we had no major transformative infrastructure during that period. However, to fulfill our 2020 manifesto promises, the spending on capital projects by this PPP civic government is aligned with the 2020 manifesto through which the people of Guyana elected us, and is aimed at delivering first-class social services, improve access to health care, quality education, improve water and sanitation. You see, we are now working to get more than 90% of our people on the coast having access to treated water, expansion of the healthcare system. This is where the investment is going. To reduce the infrastructure gap. That is what we have to do. Reduce the infrastructure gap. This is what helped to bring equity between regions. Without the investment in physical infrastructure, it would not be possible to improve the country's international competitiveness. Or the barriers to private sector, development, and economic growth. If we don't do this, how are we going to improve our international competitiveness? How are we going to get rid of the barriers to private sector development and economic growth and expansion? According to the IDB, the deficient transportation network stifles economic opportunity in every sector. This is what the IDB said. The deficient transportation network stifles economic opportunity in every sector. And what did we do to address this? To address the infrastructure gap, the IDB, not the government of Guyana, the IDB estimated that we will have to invest between 9.4 billion US dollars to 23.8 billion US dollars by 2030 to upgrade the transportation network, expand the energy grid. Listen, exactly what we're doing, the PPP civic government is doing. They estimate that we will have to spend between 9.4 US billion to 23.8 billion US dollars by 2030 to upgrade the transportation network, exactly what we are doing, expand the energy grid, exactly what we are doing, improve water and sanitation facilities, exactly what we are doing, and the telecommunications sector that is important for connectivity and digital transportation, exactly where the PPP civic expenditure profile is and what we are targeting. And then to create employment opportunities. By investing in infrastructure, by having this capital expenditure, investing in infrastructure, this PPP civic government is also providing skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled citizens with high-paying employment opportunity. Look at what is happening in the construction sector. Look at what is happening in the construction sector. Look at what is happening in the housing sector. Look at all the new hotels as a result of the investments we are making, the policy-making matrix, more confidence in the economy, new banks are being built, new hotels, new facilities. All of that generate jobs. All of that create opportunity. The investment is also leading to an expansion of the private sector. Look at credit to the private sector, how it's growing. Look at the improvement in non-performing loans. All of that is linked to the expenditure profile of the government. All of that is linked to the performance of the government, the investment of the government, that is creating an enabling environment for the expansion of the private sector, expansion of credit to the private sector, and the improvement in non-performing loans. When we open up lands for industrial development, commercial development, residential opportunity, creating new areas of growth, new industrial hub, the Wales Development Zone, the Palmyra Development Zone, working on the Linden Development Zone, the Enmore Industrial Park, all of these. Lethem Development Zone. All of these investments are geared at creating opportunity, opening up expenditure, creating new industries, expanding the economy, expanding the private sector, expanding jobs, creating higher paid jobs, and diversifying the economy. A key aspect of what we want to do. Diversify the economy. When you're investing to create 50,000 new house lots, 50,000 new house lots, what does that investment do? It aids home ownership, empowers people, increase net value, increase net worth, increase the family value, increase the community value. This is what the investment does. Now, it is also known that capital expenditure catalyzes economic growth. Public investment has played an important role in catalyzing economic growth in Guyana since it has a multiplier effect. The backward and forward linkages of the construction sector creates a ripple effect throughout the economy that persists for many years. A recent study, let's look at external sources. A recent study by the World Bank revealed that the multiplier effect of public investment is twice as high as those from tax reduction and fiscal transfers. Let me go over that slowly. A recent study by the World Bank revealed that the multiplier effect of public investment is twice as high as those from tax reduction and fiscal transfer. The same study estimated the multiplier effect to be 1.5, meaning that for every dollar of public investment, economic activity is increased by $1.5. That is what the World Bank study is saying. And here is where our public expenditure profile is. Creating wealth, expanding opportunity, creating the multiplier effect, catalyzing economic activity. That is what our expenditure profile does. Unlike the APNU AFC government, the PPP civic government is mindful of its obligation to ensure that taxpayers receive maximum benefits for every dollar invested. This necessitates a reduction in the inefficiency in government spending. And this is important. How do we reduce inefficiency in government? Let us look at the housing expenditure, 2019 versus 2023. Recurrent expenditure or operational expenditure in 2019 was 19% of the share of the housing budget. 19% of the share of the housing budget. You know what it is today? We're implementing a larger housing program. They achieved virtually nothing under their housing program, spending billions of dollars. 19% of their expenditure profile was on this recurrent expenditure. We are implementing a program that is unbelievable in its size and magnitude, and only 9% of the expenditure profile is recurrent expenditure. And examine it for yourself. What did they achieve between 2015 and 2020 in housing? What we have achieved in the last 4 years alone. And we have achieved that with 9% of the expenditure profile as recurrent expenditure versus 19% that they expended. Their employment costs was 11% of the expenditure. They achieved nothing for housing. between 2015 and 2020, yet their employment costs were 11% of the expenditure. Today, all that we have achieved in housing, less than 5% is our employment cost of total expenditure. Our capital expenditure is 90%, more than 90% of the expenditure profile of the government program. That is the difference. Where our priority lies. That is the difference. Where our priority lies. Now, if you look at the central government, you will see the same story. Capital expenditure as a component of the total budget in 2019 was 24%. 24%. In 2023, 53%. 53%. Look at the central government budget. This is a difference. This is a difference between philosophy. This is a difference between expenditure profile. And this is a difference between what the expenditure is targeted to do. So my friends, I just wanted to spend this brief moment with you tonight to outline to you with great clarity the philosophy of two different governments, the philosophy that influence the policy-making matrix and the expenditure profile and matrix of the APNU AFC government and the People's Progressive Party civic government. I thank you for lending me your time and allowing me in your homes. As I said, we'll be together explaining all of these things continuously to you, the Guyanese people. God bless you and have a great rest of the night. Thank you.